You're listening to the DFO Rundown podcast with Frank Seravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com.
Welcome back to the DFO Rundown. We are on episode 5. I'm Jason Gregor and Frank Seravalli in lovely Philadelphia. Frankie, how you doing?
I'm good. No one's ever said lovely Philadelphia before.
You know what, man? I've been to Philly twice, and the first time I went there was I was actually doing an MMA fight in New Jersey, and so I flew in. They got me into Philadelphia, and I was amazed by the bridges, like just blown away by how tall they were in all these different areas, and it was crazy. And then just got on the highway and drove down to just outside New Jersey and did an MMA fight.
So you were the fighter?
No, God, no. I was the announcer, man. Yeah, I'm not an MMA. I love MMA as I didn't like it early, and then I got introduced to it by a guy by the name of Mark Pavlich, who ran Maximum Fighting Championships. He invited me down, and I sat ringside, and we discussed it, and I kind of learned the ins and outs of the game, because my introduction to MMA had been like the original UFC, where there was no rules, and 250 pounders were fighting 160 pounders, and there was hair pulling and everything. And I was like, man, this is barbaric. And then I never really watched it again until that. And so it was awesome for a few years. I did quite a few fights and with in the States and in Canada. It was a lot of fun.
Wow. So hair pulling, how would that work with you?
Yeah, well, that would be my one advantage, right? But it was I don't know if you ever watched any of the original days, man, but it was it was just barbaric, really. And this coming from a hockey guy who loves a good hockey fight, but usually, the thing about hockey fights that I've always found different than a street fight was usually if you knocked the guy down, it was over, right? The refs would jump in, or if you're getting a real good, pounding on the guy, the refs would stop it. But in here, the rules were no one stopped it unless the guy was basically out. So it was tough to watch as a young guy.
Yeah, it doesn't really do a lot for me. I'll watch every now and again. I'll grab a pay-per-view with some buddies, but I went to one UFC in Philly, and that was fun to be kind of ringside for that. But other than that, I'm not seeking out UFC or anything like that.
Yeah, nowadays there's a few guys that will grab your attention. Like when McGregor fights, he hasn't been as good as last few fights, but he brings an energy. Really, one of the best parts of that is the hype. When you're in the arena and there's that build-up, and just like a good boxing fight, and I'm lucky enough to be in a lot of boxing matches as well, where when someone starts winning and you can just feel the intensity, it's like the old Coliseum days, man, and people are just thirsty to see a knockout.
Yeah, and I get that. And when you're there, it's different. But my thing is, I feel like McGregor now and a couple of these other guys, they're not as hungry, right? It almost seems like when they get to these enormous paydays that they sell out, it's almost like they're just in it just for the cash. They've gotten beat up so many times that they've got nothing left. And so, it's so rare that the actual fight lives up to the hype and the buildup.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's very true. The one thing, though, that the UFC does very well is they hype it up. And if there was one thing the NHL I would like to see more is a little bit more trash talk leading up to games. I think it's kind of like a soap opera-ish a little bit, but fans love it. Fans love drama. I think I'm a fan of sports. I kind of like it a little bit. And the last McGregor fight, there was no trash talk before. I'm like, well, that's kind of part and parcel. So I wish we would see a little bit more of that. You think last year when the Oilers and Flames, after Tkachuk ran Cassian, and Cassian comes out and says what he says, well, people are just, everybody's hyped to see that next game, and we don't see that too often. Imagine if Pittsburgh and Washington had a little trash talk every now and then, or pick your team, Pittsburgh and Philly, right?
Yeah.
The fans in both markets would go crazy.
Right, and you remember how there was the picture of Sidney Crosby on the paper in Philly, and he said, I don't like people here. And, that whole thing went back and forth. That's when it gets to the next level. But most of the time in hockey, what we see is, if we have a McDavid-Matthews matchup, which God forbid the next time that happens with all the fawning over Matthews and McDavid, all they do is downplay it. Everyone tuning in to see these two guys, and they're like, oh, it's not about me, it's about the team. Why not just say something to stir it up a little bit? That's not what hockey players do, but I think everyone would be more interested in it. And I think outsiders who are casual hockey fans, that's when you might be able to get them to tune in, is two of the best players in the world going toe-to-toe, and yet all they want to do and their coaches want to do is downplay it before they even get there.
Yeah, we respect them, and I get they respect them, but you still want to beat them. And actually, Frank, guess what? Just for you, starting this Saturday, 3 consecutive games, Matthews, McDavid. They play on February 27th and March 1st and March 3rd. So you will get to see the fawning at full level.
Yeah, and look, again, all credit to Austin Matthews, but like Connor McDavid, Saturday night with the response that he provided after there was so much attention being paid to Matthews, like next level. Oh, you scored 2 goals and you've got 18 and 17 games. That's great, but I'm going to go have a 5-point night. And it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. The ability to casually toy with NHL teams, much less in a rivalry game like that. Unbelievable.
Yeah, it really is. And it was funny that somebody on Twitter put out the meme, and everybody's seen that meme where there's the guy walking down the street, there's a girl on his right corner, and there's a girl going the other way. And this time the guy was hockey Twitter, right? And then it was Matthews was the girl on the right and McDavid's the one on the left. And that's probably one of the funniest times I've ever seen that meme used, because it is true. Twitter is very quick reactionary. It's all about in the now, what's happening right now. And people were loving Matthews, and then all of a sudden McDavid's like, oh, just wait, I'm still here, guys. Here's a 5-point night. And I love it. Like, I love the fact that right now the Oilers are playing well. Toronto's obviously playing very well. McDavid's and Matthews, and then Marner and Draisaitl. Like, those 3 games in the middle of the season, it's good to get some hype for it. I think it'll be off the charts because it'll be Hockey Night in Canada on Saturday night, and I would guess there'll be a lot of viewers even in the States that will be watching.
Yeah, and look, it had to feel even better for the Oilers on Saturday night coming against Calgary. Like, the more they can create separation between themselves and the Flames and the Canucks, they're guaranteeing themselves a playoff spot if they can do that. So that's critical. Everyone's looking forward to that matchup on Saturday now that you inform me when it is, because, with so few teams in the division, like, you just suspect that they'd play them soon, but it's going to be amazing to see these 2 teams, and the Oilers trending in the right direction, by the way, 8-2 in their last 10 against, this should be some sort of measuring stick for how they stack up against the team that's emerged as the top in the division after the Montreal Canadiens have kind of, their wheels are falling off in Montreal.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We're going to have a new segment. We're going to introduce our producer in a second, Ty, who will come in. We've got a new buy or sell segment. But quickly, Frank, I want to update. Was there any shoveling with no gloves this week? Are you guys getting bombarded with snow still?
No snow, and it's about to get really warm here. The days are getting longer. I just saw something on Twitter. In 3 weeks, we'll be having daylight until 7 p.m. Like, it can't come soon enough. No snow, and it's going to be in the low 50s here later this week. So getting closer to golf season.
Do you know how to quickly compare Fahrenheit to Celsius?
I don't. I just guess based on what I think I know. Like, my guess is like low 50s is somewhere around like 10.
I think so, yeah, because 0 Celsius is 32 Fahrenheit. I know that. And then I know there's some formula. Maybe one of our listeners can tweet it at us. That would be great, because I could never, and I'm good at math, but I've never actually looked to figure out how you can do it quickly. Because when you tell me it's 50, I'm like, yeah, okay, I think that's 10, but I don't really.
But like, I go based on like what I think is in the general ballpark, and I throw it out there, and someone's like, yeah, that's it. And like, I'm like, oh, good. I seem like quasi-intelligent.
All right. Now let's get to our new segment. We're going to welcome in producer Ty. He is going to be running it. Ty, how you doing, my man?
I'm good, Jason. Also, by the way, Frank, I looked it up. 50 Fahrenheit. You're bang on. 10 degrees Celsius. You nailed it.
It just gets, and I end up coming out looking smart.
Look at Ty, though, by the way, Frank. He's got a matching toque and sweater right there. Color coordinated. I like it.
Is he playing for the Montreal Maroons back in the day, or what?
People were tweeting us saying that the fashion on the show wasn't very good, so hence why I figured I got to start turning on my camera and getting involved a little bit here. But the new segment, guys.
Hey, look at this sweet shirt right here. Little James Dean for you. Love it.
The new segment, guys, buy or sell. I'm going to give you a statement, and you got to let me know, are you buying or selling on that? So we will get started with something on Sidney Crosby. It was his 1,000th game over the weekend. Sidney Crosby is a top 5 all-time player. Buy or sell?
I'm going to go buy. I got Gretzky 1, Lemieux 2 or 3, Crosby 4, Gordie Howe 5. He's right in there. 3 Stanley Cups, 2 Conn Smythes. Way better than a point per game. 1,278 points in 1,000 games. That's a buy.
That's hard to argue with that. To me, it's if his career ended today, would I put him top 5? Man, there's some other guys. Granted, the other guys are more from past decades. Really, I think in the last 30 years for sure. The only other guy maybe would be Jágr, but Jágr I think had more longevity. I still have Nick Lidstrom in my top 5. I think Nick Lidstrom was one of the most underrated players of all time. Like, he was dominant. So I'm going to sell for now, but I think in 3 years he'll be top 5.
On to the next one here. Kevin Lankinen and the Chicago Blackhawks. They are a playoff team. Gregor, buy or sell?
I'm selling, man. And trust me, Patrick Kane is my favorite player to watch when the puck's on his stick in the offensive zone. He's a wizard. But they're getting crushed at every analytics, every goals for at 5-on-5. And their special teams is keeping him in, but I've seen that eventually it'll derail. So I am selling on the Hawks being a playoff team.
I'm going sell on the Hawks being a playoff team. I think points percentage, you take a look at the standings, they're right on the bubble. I think one of Columbus or Dallas will pass them. But I am going to buy on Kevin Lankinen. He's a guy that you talk to some people in the goalie world is emerging as a legit number 1 potential. And I think he's right there in the mix for the Finnish Olympic team too, to be in their second or third goalie.
You guys touched on Connor McDavid a little bit earlier. Connor McDavid will hit the 100-point mark in the regular season. Frank, you buying or selling?
Buying. How many games left against the Ottawa Senators? Is it 6?
5.
Something like that? 5. Perfect. 3 points a game. That gives you another 15 points. And then I think the math still holds up, especially after dropping a 5-point bomb on Saturday, that you really only need to play just about at your career average, which for him isn't hard to do.
Yeah, I'm buying, but not because of the Senators. The Senators are actually one of the teams where he went over this year. The Sens suddenly are more competitive, but McDavid, his 5-on-5 scoring, it sounds crazy, but it was a little bit slow for him to start the year. And now his line has scored in 4 games in a row, 5-on-5, including himself. I think he's going to get back to his 5-on-5 levels. So yeah, I'm buying on 110, and I'm really thinking he's got a shot to push 110. Sorry, I'm buying 100 and I'm pushing to 110.
You guys touched on Austin Matthews a little bit already. And Frank, last episode, you said it's ridiculous that he could get a goal a game, but I think Austin Matthews will get 50 goals. You buying or selling?
I'm selling. Like, it seemed to stir up some social media buzz with Leafs Nation. Like, why? Alex Ovechkin is the greatest goal scorer of all time, with all due respect to everyone that came before him. And the most that he's put up is 48 in 56. This is one man extremely hot in Austin Matthews. Obviously, he's capable of scoring at a significant clip, but 50 in 55, like, come on. Let's talk about a stat that's actually achievable. That's Mitch Marner, 56 assists in 56 games.
Oh, I'm buying, baby, but I love goals. Hey, Cam Neely got 50 in 49 once. So I think Matthews, can he get 50 and 55 because he's already missed a game? I think 50 and 55. He's not, but I'm buying on 50 because I love goals.
For the last one, guys, we're going to stay in the All-Canadian division. I think the Canadians will not come top 2 in the North. Buy or sell, Frank?
Sell. I picked the Habs to win the North Division. They looked like a juggernaut to start. They're a team that has lost their way a bit. I truly believe that Claude Julien is in trouble. And moving forward, they can get back there if they can find their confidence again. That team has all the assets, size, strength, speed, creativity, young talent. I think they're a team that's going to be right there. They've set themselves apart from the rest, and it's going to be a dogfight for 3 and 4 in the North.
Yeah, well, I'm buying all day long, Ty. I look at the Canadians. If William Nylander or Ryan Nugent-Hopkins is your best forward, I don't think you're going to finish top 2. And I like Nylander and Nugent-Hopkins, but that's essentially what Montreal's best guys are. They don't have a Matthews or a Marner or a McDavid or a Draisaitl. I don't think they can compete in the elite of Toronto and Edmonton offensively. And Carey Price, for whatever reason right now, is really struggling. So here's my other question. What would the Seattle Kraken do if Price agrees to waive his no movement clause and gets exposed in the expansion draft, would they make him their Marc-Andre Fleury, kind of their face of their franchise? And do you think Carey Price, who's from the West Coast, would consider it, Frank?
Why would the Kraken consider it? That contract is a potential to be an anchor with a capital A. I mean, seriously, moving forward, it would be difficult for the Habs to move it if they wanted to. Yet, then you'd have to even get to that part, you'd have to ask a whole series of other questions. Would the Habs even ask Price to move? Why would they need waive? Why would they need him to waive? Is that in order to keep Jake Allen? Like, I don't know. Like, it doesn't really seem, the whole thing doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to me, the premise, because I think the Habs are married to Carey Price for better or for worse.
Well, look at how good Jake Allen played last year. Look at how well he's playing this year. And you look at Carey Price now for 3 seasons. Like, Montreal brought in Jake Allen.
The Kraken aren't taking that deal, and they're not going to hamstring themselves with $10.5 million a year for their goaltender. I don't see many teams willing to pay that much for any netminder, let alone a guy who could potentially be on the decline soon if he's not there already.
Yeah, well, and that's the question. I was like, would Seattle do it if the opportunity was there? Because, Marc-Andre Fleury, now granted they had won cups, of course, but he had kind of lost his starting job to Matt Murray at that time, and some people wondered if he would get it back. And so I just wonder, does a change of scenery help Carey Price? Because it's fascinating to me when you look at his numbers, Frank, like he's not just, on the cusp of like a 900 or like he's like an 880 save percentage right now, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, and he started actually out really well in the first few games of the season, which kind of goes to show you, given the numbers, how poor he's been in the last few. But you mentioned Marc-Andre Fleury, and I want to throw this at you. What happens if he's the Seattle Kraken goaltender that they pick to start their expansion team? Because the Golden Knights are going to have to make a similar decision with Leonard and Fleury because they both are under contract. So one of those guys is going to be exposed. I wouldn't be shocked if it was Leonard just because of his contract and the term that remains on it. But it would make a lot of sense. Fleury having done it once before, you look at his numbers, some people would say he's the comeback player of the year, or certainly one of them, or in the conversation based off of last season. And to me, my argument with Fleury is I think he's been good all along. I haven't seen 1 ounce of decline in Marc-Andre Fleury's game at any point to suggest that he's, growing a little bit worse with age.
You bring up a valid point for Vegas, and I wonder how many teams, Frank, are going to see if they can convince players with big contracts to waive if they have a no movement clause at all, or just to expose them just to see. Because, the flat cap moving forward to me is going to be fascinating. I think pending UFAs are not going to get the money they thought they would get even a year ago. And, Leonard, because you have term, you're right. Like, Price is a major risk. There's no question about it. But there is something to be said about having a big marquee name to start for an organization. And he is from the West Coast. So who knows if he somehow finds his game in the second half of the season, or maybe in the postseason, I wonder if it changes the conversation a bit. But the expansion draft, to me, I don't expect teams to do what they did against Vegas, like Columbus and Minnesota, and ones that obviously in hindsight made some brutal errors and gave up really good players for, ended up losing 2 players. Florida was probably one of the worst with Smith and Marchessault. But I think this year it's going to be about trying to convince players on long-term deals to be exposed. Like, there'll be some, like Jeff Skinner is obviously getting exposed, and guys like that, I would assume, if teams can convince them to do it.
This has the potential. I don't want to make everyone all hot and horny here in mid-February or late February, but this has the potential to be the best summer or off season in hockey history. When you consider the potential names that could be out there, we don't know what happens with Crosby and Malkin in Pittsburgh. What happens if they don't make the playoffs and the Penguins begin to have the conversation about a rebuild? What about in Florida, Huberdeau and Barkov? Are those guys willing to sign extensions there? Then you've got the UFA market, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins, Ryan Getzlaf, John Gibson, the netminder. Then you've got the expansion draft. So many other layers to this. I'm sure I'm forgetting a few. You mentioned Buffalo, Jack Eichel. What happens there? Like, this summer has the potential to be absolute bananas.
Let's get to Frankly Speaking. And I know Frank is fired up about something this week.
Yeah, I saw so much coverage, and I guess it's like par for the course with Twitter, feigning outrage, calling this weekend the mistake on the lake. And I'm like, wait a second, that's Cleveland. That's not the NHL outdoors at Lake Tahoe. And so everyone wants to be critical. I actually give the NHL props in this case because this wasn't a money-making venture for the league. When you think about their outdoor games that they've put on in the past, the expense that's required to do so, yeah, they were selling 60, 70, 80,000 tickets that made it a bonanza, and a big reason why the league kept going outdoors, not just because it looked good, but because it made a lot of money. And no fans there. I'm sure it cost a lot to put on these games. Maybe a little feather in the cap for some sponsors who have been around for a long time. But this was for the look and for the vista, and they pulled that off spectacularly well. My beef with the NHL is that they started Saturday afternoon's game. The ice looked terrible from the start and was significant ruts there. So they decided to play it anyway, try and get that first period in because they were in the national broadcast window, and they knew that if they couldn't, that what ended up playing out in this case, which was coming back after midnight Eastern, which is no good to anyone after Saturday Night Live, that would be the consequence. So they had the national TV window, they had the perfect views, and they wanted to get that in, but it made the playing conditions unsafe. You watched guys falling all over the ice, tripping over the blue line at center ice. Guys were repeatedly falling down. If Nathan McKinnon blew out a knee on Saturday afternoon, that first period, we'd have a whole different story to talk about. So my gripe isn't that the NHL went and tried it, that they had weather issues, any of that. I loved it. I thought Sunday night they went out and totally redeemed themselves with that evening game. But my issue was starting Saturday afternoon when you knew the ice was bad, because that created a dangerous environment for the players and for the officials that were on the ice. And if someone got hurt, like I said, it'd be a totally different story.
No, that's totally fair. I played actually in the world's longest game back in 2005, where we played for 250 straight hours outdoors. And when it started, it was sunny. And so when I was watching that, I'm like, wow, the blue lines, any where you have paint underneath, and we didn't have any logos on the ice. So obviously the logos made it worse, but it's slushy and you virtually can't glide. That's there's so much gliding in hockey. It saves energy. And we had that for a day and a half, and then it got cold again, thankfully. But, lots of guys were twisting ankles. Now, we're a bunch of, schmucks, so it's a little bit different. But that's all I thought about. And you're right, Frank. Why start the game? Had you waited, you probably could have started maybe at 9 Eastern, right? Or a little bit later in the day, even because they obviously really chopped up the ice. So then they had to resurface it numerous times just to get it back to decent.
Right. And so then 9 Eastern is 6 Pacific, and the sun is kind of just setting, and it would have looked good. But then you're running into that Saturday Night Live window. And I think there was a whole bunch of broadcast issues or windows that they had to work around. And that's what made it really difficult. So again, I know why they wanted to try it, but once it became pretty evident halfway through that period, they probably should have stopped. That's my
and that's totally fair. But
other than that, to sit here and criticize the league for trying something different that clearly wasn't a cash grab, what do you want? I give them full marks for trying to do something out and think outside the box and go to Tahoe.
I find social media is more of a place for people to complain, and so I kind of just went off of it, because you're right. There's the hindsight police are the best out there, because I didn't see one person who wrote me, hey guys, this is not going to be great to do it in midday because of the sun. So if no one out there who's complaining thought, I know they'll say, well, that's the NHL's job, but sometimes, things get overlooked, and it's unfortunate. But Boston and Philly game went off really without a hitch. They had to change the time start, but it went off okay. And sometimes, you're looking to try new things, and just because it doesn't work doesn't mean that we need to neuter people and never try. If no one ever tries something new. But I will say this, watching the scenic views is something that a lot of people, I know in Western Canada, because of the Rockies, are like, man, could you have an Oilers Flame game here? There'll be other places that think, is this something that's possible? But if you can't have fans there, Frank, because ultimately you want to make money if you're a league, I wonder if they'll do it again unless there's a place where they can have fans.
Yeah, and that remains to be seen. I think they really wanted to do Lake Louise, and they tried. They ran into some issues with the federal government in terms of what they were prohibited in selling, sponsorships and things like that. And look, it's coronavirus, COVID-19. Like, you couldn't have fans even if you wanted to, even though it's outside. So this was the perfect year to try something different. It just bothers me to see all these people on Twitter. It's like, if you're not outraged, you're not trying. And it's like, that's not the way it's supposed to be.
Well, let's transition that into something I think there'll be a little outrage about. Is we got a Hall of Fame guest coming up today on the DFO Rundown, as we are going to be joined by Hayley Wickenheiser right now.
Let's bring her in.
And now we are joined by a very special guest. She is the Assistant Director of Player Development for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of course, she spent 23 years with Canada's women's hockey team. She's the all-time leading scorer, won 4 gold medals at the Olympics, a silver, also went to the Olympics as a softball player. And of course, in 2019 was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame. And I guess in her spare time, she's becoming a doctor. So seemingly does a lot of stuff. Hayley Wickenheiser joins us. Hayley, how you doing?
Hey, Jason. Good. How are you guys?
Good. I hear you're 6 weeks away from becoming a resident. So I guess the big decision is what you're going to go and specialize in. How tough of a decision is that for a doctor to know which way you're going?
I think it becomes difficult at the start, but as you go through medicine, you really gravitate towards what you like. And then the next part is applying to residency programs and actually getting into the thing that you like. So that's what all of med students across Canada are going through right now. It's called the CARMS process. And so we're in the midst of interviews for different programs across the country in a couple of weeks.
Clearly, you're somebody who likes to be busy and work a lot on top of doing your residency. And in med school, you're assistant director for player development for the Toronto Maple Leafs. But during COVID, there's no training camps or anything. So how has that role changed? What have you been doing in that role for the past few months?
Yeah, well, it's been quite a year. I mean, when the pandemic hit, I think all of us player development quickly shifted to Zoom. I know with the Leafs, we did a deep dive on every prospect and every player from a physical, skill, technical, mental development standpoint. And then when the bubbles started to open in the various cities, especially I've been going back and forth between Toronto and Calgary finishing medicine, but our staff in Toronto in particular were at the rink every day for 4 months with players that were in the unofficial bubble. And I was doing that as well when I was in Toronto, back and forth. Right now, as the season has started, we have some staff that are in the Leaf bubble and some staff that are in the Marley bubble. And then what we're all doing on the side is a lot of, again, looks into the players early on in the season, 5-6 games in, see what areas we can continue to help improve and give the coaching staff any, little things that they can work on in development time. So it's definitely changed the way that we do business, but it's been a really interesting process. I think we've made actually some significant gains in the way that our whole group operates and communicates with each other. And it's been a lot of fun evolving through the year.
So Hayley, how do you split your time between medicine and the Leafs and what you're doing?
So typically I've been kind of, I'll just say sort of a month on, month off kind of thing. When I'm in Toronto, I was able to do some rotations in medicine. So things like family medicine, obstetrics, I was able to do in Ontario. And then I'd be back in Calgary for another rotation. So as my rotations evolve and depending on where they were approved before the pandemic hit, that's where I ended up. So it's really limited, obviously, the amount that we can travel and move around. I was in Toronto a fair bit more prior to the pandemic, but 6 weeks to go, and then hopefully things will be different as well.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that. And now, just to narrow down on exactly what you're doing with the Leafs, are you kind of devouring some video, and then are you having Zoom calls specifically with the players to work through some things, or how does it work?
Before the season started, that's what we were doing. Definitely this morning I was looking at Adam Brooks, for example, his first 6 games of the season. sort of taking into account like his development priorities and areas that he's either improved in or we can continue to support the coaching staff in helping him improve in. So that's sort of our projects right now, are to take individual players, whether it's the Leafs or the Marlies at this point. Different areas, different folks are doing different things. And then on the ground in Toronto, we would be in the bubble. And as you guys well know, the testing protocols are pretty impressive in the NHL right now. So you're COVID tested every day for the next day, and if you're going to games, you get the rapid test as well. So it's really impressive what the NHL has done, and in particular what the Leafs have done, I think, through the pandemic to keep everybody safe.
Hayley, your resume, of course, speaks for itself. You're one of the best hockey players around. As player development and being a female kind of in a man's world in the National Hockey League, how was that getting in? Has it changed at all in the brief time you've been in, or do you feel like is there more of I have to prove myself? Is it more of a challenge being a woman?
I don't feel like it's a challenge because I've spent my whole life in this world. So I think when I was younger, it was this constant, like, I'm going to show you kind of thing. And people were always sort of skeptical. And now I don't feel like there's anything left to prove. I know what I'm doing. I'm confident in my abilities. I think within the Leafs, we have a very good staff. I mean, we've got 3 women in player development alone, Barb Underhill and Randy Milani, who work with the skating, and then myself, and then the rest of our group that we communicate quite well constantly through WhatsApp and different clips every day that we're watching and talking about. So I felt like this is probably the best year that player development has had in the 3 years that I've been with the Leafs, actually. So I think we've made a lot of gains.
You mentioned Barb Underhill, and I know Braden Point, who plays in Tampa, and a lot of your prospects and players have worked with her. And you go back to when you started, and just even the evolving in edge work and how much that allows players to be better. Like, I don't know if you've been on the ice with Barb or not, but how much better do you think you would have been if you got that training at a young age?
Well, I did skate with Barb actually when I was still playing ice. I've known Barb for a long time, and we did some sessions through the years. And even with Daryl Belfry, who I worked with for 8 years before I retired, I mean, working with Barb. So it's a lot of crossover. Skating is huge. And I think now what you're seeing is, old style skating is like long stride, never cross your feet, straight lines. And now you look at McDavid, as you guys well know there, everything he does and why he's so fast is everything's on an angle and in a crossover. And so I think that's the way in which the game is changing. It's the ability to change directions, the ability to go east-west and then north-south and actually keep accelerating, which, he's the best in the world at doing that. So skating is definitely, I know that with the Leafs, they put a lot of stock in that, and Barb has done a great job with the players that she's worked with. You can really see the progression that they can make through just even a few weeks.
Hayley, you've put so much time and effort into medicine, and hockey's been your whole life. Do you have a decision to make sort of when you get through this with school? Like, do you think you can continue to do both at the same time?
Well, you asked me the $1 million question there, Frank. Yeah, you know what? I don't know at this point. I mean, I am really trying to do my residency in Toronto in the GTA. So hopefully that will happen. And then the Leafs have been great. They understand that medicine's a bit more rigid than hockey is the last little bit. And when I started with the Leafs, I made it kind of clear to Kyle Dubas that I was going to finish medicine. That's something I've always wanted to do. So I'll see, where the future holds here. My contract's up in July, and depending on what they want to do. But I want to continue to work in hockey for sure. And I've been able to blend the two so far, and I don't see why I couldn't down the road, depending on what my role is. But I'm kind of open-minded about whatever could happen.
Mm-hmm. So let's dive into the state of the women's game. You've been pretty steadfast all along in your belief that in order for the Women's Pro Hockey League to get off the ground, or pro hockey leagues, I should say, they need support from the NHL. And now we're seeing that with the PWPHA in terms of these games with the Maple Leafs. You've got the Blackhawks and Rangers involved. So they're starting to get some more of that support. Where do you kind of sense, and what's your evaluation on where things stand at the moment?
Well, I think what we're seeing is exactly what I talked about a little while ago, in the sense of there's no room for two leagues. And the NWHL, the league that tried to make a go of it in Lake Placid and ultimately couldn't do it with, I guess, a COVID shutdown, that league's not going to be able to survive and move forward. So when the best players in the world are not playing in that league, that tells you something. So the way forward is this group of players that's holding out the PWHPA. I don't know what the next entity will look like. I'm not really involved in the discussions at all. But I know that I think there's some things brewing with the NHL here to move forward and create a league. And had the pandemic not hit, we might have seen this a little bit sooner, but I think that really slowed the momentum for the women's game. So hopefully they can get that back. And, with NHL clubs, I think they know the entity to support and it's clear when the Leafs and the Rangers, et cetera, are putting their money behind the PWHPA, you kind of know that that's the league of the future. So I think that's pretty safe to say that's what we're going to see down the road.
And you look at that league, and I've talked to some of the active players right now, and they're excited about it, but they're also kind of frustrated. And obviously COVID, as you mentioned, plays a big role in it. But, 6 teams seems like a realistic number to start, more of a regional Eastern league, just because of, less travel. Like the cost factor obviously is one of it. I find that a lot of the players are very willing to want to help grow their game. Whereas sometimes in the NHL, the players maybe take it for granted how important that stuff is. And so when you see, let's say COVID, and you're in the medical industry, let's look at it positively, maybe next season, things will get back close to normal. In your utopian world, like what would be the best strategy for the women's league to start and have success?
So I would say exactly what you just said, Jason. I think 6 teams max, probably Eastern base where you're limiting travel. You could play in NHL venues, but you're probably better off to play in sort of a smaller junior size rinks where you're getting 8 to 10,000 people a game. A shortened season, maybe a 40-game season, to limit budget as well as just the costs that players are going to have to be paid. I don't think any player in the world expects to be paid NHL type salaries, and they all understand that in order to grow the game, they're going to have to be very fan facing, very open to doing things that are maybe untraditional in the hockey world, which is kind of this very sort of stale traditional environment. And it comes down to TV. So who's going to be the one to pick up the TV contracts and who's going to televise these games and where is it going to happen? So I think we need the American market for sure. That's where the money is going to come from, and the passion will come from Canada. So it'll be interesting.
How important is it, do you think, to ensure that the league is just like the NHL when it comes to European players and having Finland and Sweden and making sure so this is the best of the best, and it doesn't have to be just North American players?
Well, if you're paying players, that's not going to be a problem. The problem is that you're asking, the best player from Finland, Sweden to come and play, and they're, working a part-time job or making $1,000 a month, and they could be playing back in Sweden and making money, or in Finland or in some of the European leagues that actually pay some of these women to play. So you're right. Like the best players in the world have to be in this league, or it's not going to be a good product. And there are European players that fit into the top 120 players in the world. It's not just all North American. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. But I think if players are paid, they will come to play.
We've talked a lot about your role with the development department with the Leafs, but just thinking on a broader macro level in terms of women involvement in front offices, what's the next step, do you think? What's the next step that needs to be taken as women continue to climb the ranks in these organizations to ultimately be considered for the top positions, do you think?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think getting women into roles and then having time in those roles and to learn the business, to be around the game, to understand how the inner workings of the NHL operate. I think open-mindedness of people running these clubs is very important. I always say you need champions. So, I think of early on in the women's game, one of the champions, or two of the champions that I think about, are, people would say that's very untraditional, but Bobby Clark and Brian Burke. I mean, those are the two guys that that come to mind right away as probably the most supportive men in hockey that I've ever been around. And old school would say, well, they shouldn't like the women's game. They're kind of these old school tough guys, but quite the opposite. So I think it's surprising how much support is there. But you can't just plunk somebody in there just because of their gender or their race. You've got to be able to be competent to do the job. But so you need to open opportunities up to learn the game and to do that.
How close do you think we are to seeing that?
Well, there's already, obviously there's women in roles in the NHL. If you're talking about a GM position, is that what you're getting at? Or
like GM, president of hockey ops, someone being on the bench, like how far away from that are we seeing to see that?
I don't really know. I mean, I think it's probably imminently coming. It's just going to depend on timing, situation, and the right opportunity. But I it's there. It's the opportunities are there. If somebody was interested and capable of taking advantage, I don't think that the game is completely closed to that. Whereas, say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said there's no chance. I see like the door has kind of propped its way open. Who's going to be the first one to do it? That's always tough, right? Who's going to be that first one to take that chance? But the world is changing pretty fast in those areas, so I don't see it as such a barrier.
And then Hayley, from the women's game perspective, you look at like the NBA and the WNBA and the NFL, like the greats of those leagues are a lot of times, heavily involved with it, especially on a media broadcast side. We look at yourself and, maybe an Angela James or, Cassie Campbell, of course, now is in the NHL. But when the women's game comes off, how important do you think it would be to have, like big names of the women's game involved with the women's game? Maybe not necessarily as coaches, but more in like in a public profile.
Yeah, I think it's really important. I mean, everybody loves, I'll use the NHL as a comparison. Everybody loves to see the greats of the game back involved in the NHL. I mean, to see Mario with Pittsburgh or, Wayne sitting in the box in Edmonton and just being involved, like that's fun for fans and for people. And my biggest sort of concern for the women's game to get off the ground is actually on the business operations side is just, can we get a solid model that's going to run itself, and let's just get the best people for the jobs. And if that's the best players that have played the game, then that's a bonus, but that's what has to happen first. And I think the best players in women's hockey will always want to be involved with a league as long as it's a credible league. And right now, I don't think too many want to be involved in the shambles that's gone on till we get a good league going.
So with COVID, and I don't know how close you are. You've spent 23 years with the women's national team. How much of a challenge is that right now? When you think about, obviously, you got the Olympics coming up soon, but you really kind of went a year without playing. How challenging is it going to be for especially Canada and US, because they still dominate?
Yeah, I mean, the World Championships are supposed to be held in Halifax in April. I don't know how they're going to do that, but it's a little bit disheartening, I guess, to look at, they host the World Juniors in Edmonton in a bubble. We know they're probably not going to invest in that in women's hockey, but it's the right thing to do. They should do that for the women's game, to hold a World Championship they could do it. The IHF could do it. So I wonder if they will. They're talking about maybe pushing it back to August. So I don't know. We don't have a crystal ball to see how COVID is going to go, but April seems a bit early, a bit premature. But, if they do the right sort of bubble scenario, I suppose anything's possible. But it's hard to lose a year. So hopefully for the Canadian players, they've been working hard while nobody's watching. That's kind of how you live your life in women's hockey anyway. And I think the team that's made the most gains in this downtime is really going to be the one that has the edge going into the World Championships and then the Olympic Games next year. It'll be interesting to see.
All right, Hayley, it's time for some rapid fire action. We've got 6 lighthearted questions for you. We'll start the clock. What is your favorite way to unwind after a long day at hospital?
Netflix and wine.
Where's the vacation spot we're going to see Hayley Wickenheiser after COVID-19? Where can we find you?
Oh, man. I'll be in the rink. That's my vacation.
One word to describe why Saskatchewan produces among the most NHL players per capita.
Incredible resiliency.
There you go. When is the last time you played competitive softball?
I don't even know. I threw a ball last summer. That was it. It's been years. 2000.
So really, 2000, the Olympics? That's really kind of the last time you really...
A competitive game, yeah.
Wow.
Favorite American to go toe-to-toe with? Who did you have the best battles with?
Oh, Angela Ruggiero. She was huge, and we always had some good battles.
And your most memorable goal scored? I know that's a tough one because there were a lot of them.
I think the Salt Lake City, I think it made it 3-2 or something. I don't know if it was a game winner, but it was a big goal. So that was one of them.
Do you miss softball?
Yeah, I do. I miss playing. I love the game. I love playing the game. Not so much watching baseball per se, but I love playing. But just time and other things in life, I just haven't had a chance.
Well, it sounds like you're super busy. Thanks for sharing some time with us. We really appreciate it, and we hope to get your thoughts when there's a big announcement, hopefully coming either for the World Championships or, more importantly, maybe for a women's league coming potentially in the fall or hopefully very soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys, and thanks for your support. It's awesome.
That was the Hall of Famer, Hayley Wickenheiser. Always really intelligent stuff, and I'm curious to see, Frank, where the women's league is going to go. We know it's coming. I agree with Hayley wholeheartedly that you need one league, and I think there's a chance here for the women's game to really get some traction moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I just wish that it didn't come down to pride and stubbornness. Like one of these entities is going to have to bow out at a certain point in deference to the other and for the good of the game. But there's some incredibly strong-willed people involved, and to their credit, everyone's trying. So, certainly don't want to knock the NWHL or anything that's gone on there. I think the way that their playoffs in Lake Placid and their bubble played out was unfortunate because that was an opportunity to gain some traction. And now moving forward, like I said, they've got to find a way to come together, thaw whatever freeze exists between the two organizations, and either combine or one bow out. And to this point, we haven't seen that.
It'll be something to watch for sure. It's a great week coming up in the NHL. When we talk next, Frank, it'll be the eve of your McDavids-Matthews matchup. I know you'll be super excited for that. So we will look forward to catching up on the pod later this week.
That is tasty.
Thanks for listening to the DFO Rundown with Seravalli and Gregor. Keep it locked on dailyfaceoff.com and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts from to never miss an episode.